They said Abraham Lincoln died from a bullet, but history never tells you how many hands pulled the trigger. On the night of April 14, 1865, Washington, D.C. was glowing with celebration. The war that had torn America apart for 4 long years was finally over. Confederate armies were surrendering. Union flags fluttered from every building. Church bells rang. Crowds filled the streets, singing, crying, and drinking in relief. But inside Ford's Theater, something far darker than celebration was moving through the shadows. Abraham Lincoln, the man who had saved the Union, sat in a velvet-lined box with his wife, Mary. He laughed during the comedy Our American Cousin, unaware that within minutes his life, and perhaps the future of the United States, would be violently ripped away. Official history tells a simple story. John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and Confederate sympathizer, shot Lincoln in a lone act of revenge. But that version of events collapses when you begin to examine the evidence. Because Booth was not alone. Because this assassination was not improvised. And because what happened that night was not just murder, it was a coordinated operation that nearly destroyed the American government. Lincoln had enemies everywhere. He had defeated the South. He had crushed the slave system. He was planning to rebuild the nation without punishing the defeated Confederate elites. That last part terrified powerful people. Plantation owners, bankers, politicians, secret societies, and war profiteers all knew one thing. If Lincoln lived, their world was about to change forever. Just days before his death, Lincoln had begun working on policies that would redistribute land to former slaves, punish Confederate leaders, and break the political power of the Southern aristocracy. He also planned to block British and French financial interests that had secretly funded the Confederacy. Lincoln was not just a president anymore. He had become a threat to an entire global power network, and someone decided he had to die. John Wilkes Booth did not wake up one morning and decide to kill the president. For months, he had been part of a secret group that originally planned something far more ambitious. They were not going to kill Lincoln, they were going to kidnap him. The plan was simple and insane. Abduct the President of the United States, smuggle him into Confederate territory, and trade him for thousands of captured Southern soldiers. Booth recruited a group of men who had Confederate ties, criminal backgrounds, and experience moving through enemy lines. Their names would later be recorded in history, but their true role would be buried. Lewis Powell, David Harold, George Atzerodt, Mary Surratt, Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Laughlin. These were not random criminals. They were part of a conspiracy that had been operating for over a year. They held meetings in secret boarding houses. They passed coded messages. They followed Lincoln's movements. And most disturbing of all, they had help from inside the U.S. government. Washington, D.C. during the Civil War was a nest of spies. Confederate agents operated openly. Union intelligence was fragmented. Corruption was everywhere. Lincoln had free access to the White House. He personally knew Lincoln. He had visited the presidential box at Ford's Theater multiple times before the assassination. No security questioned him. That alone should have been impossible. But Booth wasn't treated like a suspect. He was treated like someone who belonged.
On March 17, 1865, Booth and his men almost succeeded. Lincoln was scheduled to attend a play at a hospital outside Washington. The kidnappers waited with horses. But Lincoln changed his plans at the last minute. The operation collapsed. Booth was furious, but he did not give up. And then something changed. The Confederacy was collapsing. If the South surrendered, kidnapping Lincoln would no longer matter. So the plan shifted from kidnapping to execution. What most Americans don't know is that Lincoln was not the only target. The conspiracy was designed to wipe out the U.S. government in one night. Lincoln would be killed. Vice President Andrew Johnson would be killed. Secretary of State William Seward would be killed. 3 strikes, total chaos, No clear successor. The Union would be leaderless. The South could rise again. This was not a madman's plan. This was a military-style coup attempt. On the night of April 14, 1865, Booth's team went into action. Lewis Powell forced his way into Seward's house and stabbed him repeatedly, leaving him bleeding but alive. George Atzerodt was supposed to kill Vice President Johnson, but he lost his nerve and got drunk instead. Booth went to Ford's Theater. 3 assassins, 3 targets, 1 coordinated strike. This was war. Booth entered Lincoln's box at 10:15 p.m. He fired 1 shot into the back of Lincoln's head. Then he jumped to the stage, shouting in Latin, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, the slogan of Virginia, the words of rebellion. He escaped into the night. But that was just the beginning. Lincoln did not die immediately. He lay unconscious for hours. Doctors gathered. They knew he would not survive. At 7:22 a.m., April 15th, Abraham Lincoln died. America fell silent. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. The government began to panic, because investigators quickly realized something terrifying. This had not been the work of one man, and the trail was leading somewhere very dangerous. Booth was hunted, but others were already destroying evidence, burning papers, moving money, erasing names. Within days, Booth was cornered in a Virginia barn. He was shot before he could be captured alive. That was convenient, because Booth knew too much. Dead men tell no secrets. The surviving conspirators were arrested, but instead of being tried in civilian court, they were sent to a military tribunal. Why? Because the government didn't want a public trial. They didn't want certain questions asked. They didn't want certain names mentioned. The trial was fast. The verdicts were brutal. 4 people were hanged. Others were imprisoned for life. And then the files were sealed. For over 100 years, thousands of pages of Lincoln assassination documents were kept hidden from the public. When some were finally released, historians were shocked. There were references to Confederate spy rings inside Washington, financial transactions from foreign banks, connections between Booth and intelligence operatives. But by then, most witnesses were long dead. The truth had been buried with them. And that raises the most disturbing question of all. Who really ordered Abraham Lincoln's death? Because Booth did not have the power to organize a national-level coup, but someone did.